Larry, back in 2018, you have launched this impressive initiative to promote new thinking and a new paradigm. Has there been a triggering moment for you?
Yeah, well, the triggering moment was the 2016 election. So the 2016 election was something we anticipated, something like that when we had started our democracy work back in 2012, 2013. But the time frame that we thought, something like the election of straight up election of a demagogue, that wouldn't happen, that was 20, 30 years away, and it happened in 4 years. And so it made us step back and say, our diagnosis was right, but this happened so much faster than we expected. What had we missed? And we zeroed in on two things. One was we missed the full significance of social media and the extent to which that disrupted, ordinary political understanding. And we missed the extent to which there had been a breakdown in the overarching ideas set within which left-right disagreement had been structured for the past 30 years. And those two factors made us realize, you need to fix those. And so we started work on both of them actually at the same time in 2017, 2018.
Yeah. When you're talking about this paradigm, it seems like something which is not usual to address for a foundation for philanthropy. It seems quite big. What do you mean by that? What is the sense? What is the essence of that?
So first, I will say it is quite usual for philanthropy to address it. The existing neoliberal paradigm was the product of a self-conscious philanthropic effort by conservative funders that launched in the 1940s and carried forward through the 1970s and 80s and still carries on today. So it may not seem usual on the left, but it has been a very important part of philanthropy on the right, which has been much more interested in ideas than the left. So one of the beefs I have with philanthropy is it is fundamentally anti-intellectual in the sense that people, at least on the left in philanthropy, do not see ideas as a form of action. They see action, they're interested in the ideas immediately adjacent to that action that help justify it, but they think it's all about building movements and political muscle and forcing through the things that they want, and don't understand that actually the ideas environment within which those proposals are situated has a powerful effect on the extent to which they get adopted and the extent to which they prove sticky. Not alone, there's many vectors that produce a political outcome, but the large ideas framework is a big part of it. Mm. So that's the understanding. And what I mean by that is the following. People have in their minds a general explanation that about the nature of society and what the society is aiming to achieve that helps explain the world to them. It's always messy, but when things are coming at them, they need a way to say, that seems right, that seems wrong. Something that seems right, they might still be persuaded out of for other reasons, political interests, culture, whatever. Things that seem wrong, they might still be persuaded to adopt for other reasons, but that explanation helps structure the initial ordering for them. And those explanations work differently for different people. So for policymakers, it's a complete economic and political philosophy that they use to generate solutions to particular problems. And for ordinary citizens, it's more like a bumper sticker, government good, markets good, government bad, or whatever. And for politicians, they sit in the middle, having to take the particular solutions generated and translate them into terms that ordinary citizens can understand that reinforce the bumper sticker understanding. And you get a virtuous cycle. Within that, the paradigm itself has plenty of room for the ongoing left-right disagreements, but there'll be that fundamental structure that people share. And it works because it lines up with the world as people are experiencing it well enough. But the world is constantly changing. And the ideas themselves are changing. And at some point, the disconnect between the explanation and the world as being experienced becomes large enough that the paradigm starts to break down. Mm. When it breaks down, people will drift to the next best explanation available to them. So neoliberalism is dying. That's not the question anymore. Just as laissez-faire died in the 1930s. At that time, people drifted in different directions. Some people became communists. That was an alternative way to understand the world. Some people became fascists. In the West, in the United States, and most of the West, the sort of Keynesian approach worked well enough. And we're in a similar period today where the neoliberal thing is breaking down. We're not going back to it. but people are drifting, and a lot of them are drifting towards ethno-nationalism, which the media calls populism, but is really, and that's a really bad alternative. So unless we give them something better, the future does not look very promising.
Mm. How would you describe the results of this first phase and exploration that you did, and the state of the movement that you're describing?
Yeah, so even in the last 3 years, it's begun to take form. So there have been people thinking about the problems with neoliberalism for quite some time, but especially since 2008. And there's a massive critique about each of its fundamental premises. And so there's a lot of arguments where, so first you start with the assumption that society consists of atomized individuals pursuing their self-interest. Okay, there's a huge critique of that has replaced it with some notion that society, we are pro-social beings, we work in and through groups, we're also individuals. Neoliberalism says the goal of a society is growth, generating wealth. Well, we now think that's actually not a very good normatively attractive goal. We need to think about a justly distributed wealth, but we don't yet have agreement on what that exactly should look like. But we have lots of competing alternatives. And then between those two things, we can come up with all sorts of new ways to think about the relationship between markets and government to harness pro-social individuals to produce a better distribution of wealth. So as I say, a lot of pieces out there, rethinking antitrust law, rethinking labor and how to empower the voice of labor as against capital, rethinking the way technology works within markets, and so roles for government to eliminate monopoly and so on. What we're missing yet is a kind of putting it together into a single coherent story that is intuitively appealing. So we're in that stage where we've got lots of pieces, but no one has yet quite put the puzzle together.
Mm. How would you define the role of philanthropy in this? What is the specific thing that you are wanting to do, what you want to do in that?
Yeah, so we're looking to do two things. We're looking to find all of the people who are thinking about these alternatives, and one, get them to work together, or at least to see themselves as part of a common intellectual movement. And two, to focus a little less on critique and more on developing the alternative agenda. And then three, on, as I say, turning it into an intuitively appealing story that can be understood by all the different actors in the ways that they need to understand it. What we have now is a hodgepodge of policies. And the problem is, as long as you have a hodgepodge of policies, they don't have staying power, right? They're still fighting an uphill battle against the residuals of the old paradigm, or worse, against something new like populism and ethno-nationalism. And so getting them into place is an uphill fight. We need to make it a downhill fight by linking them to a story that people go, right, that makes sense of the world to me. So we're trying to get the people who are the right people to do that kind of work to do it.
So what kind of movement is that?
So it's a movement of ideas. It's an intellectual movement. So we're funding universities, professors, faculty across a variety of disciplines, think tanks, people in media, people in business, think of the various sectors. We're trying to get all of them to think about these issues in these terms and then to connect to others. So it's very much funding, the creation, supporting work that is, say, working with philosophers to articulate a better alternative than the neoliberal one. In some sense, it's going back to what political economy was prior to neoliberalism. You can tell a story from Adam Smith to Joseph Schumpeter that is an ongoing intellectual story, and then it ends. Those guys were thinking about the role of economics and politics and the way in which they could be harnessed to produce a good society, macroeconomics. Right? We want to go back to that kind of thinking and get people to stop being, super hyper specialists doing technical issues on some tiny little, and think big and think about the relation to these things.
You've recently announced that you will extend the initiative and now have another 5-year period and $50 million spent for this. And you announced that you would like to go abroad and keep this movement also, sustain this movement abroad. What does that mean?
Yeah, so first, it's not that we expect to be done in 5 years. There is no way this is going to be done in 5 years. But the foundation makes its commitments in 5-year chunks when it does these initiatives. But when I said to the board, it was like, don't approve even the first 5 years unless you're ready to stay in this for a while, and they agreed with that. And it's not a U.S. issue. It's not even a geographic issue. This is a way of thinking about a globally integrated economy. So it will play out differently in different countries because the local conditions in every country is different. But what we're trying to do is really generate a way of thinking about this that can be used everywhere, even as it's applied differently everywhere. Mm. And so that requires working with people in other countries and other parts of the world, both to make it saleable and acceptable there, but also because they start from different places that help inform the thinking.
Yeah, just to mention, but we had from time to time this exchange. When I'm reading and listening to you, it's perfectly what we have in mind. So it seems that there's really something which goes beyond geographies and is completely the same at the same level, and that's interesting also for us. We should try and see how different things like narratives and so on. Maybe it's specific in detail to any country, but in the end, there seems to be something which is universal and needs to be developed on a universal
as was true for neoliberalism.
Yeah, absolutely. I would like to ask you, for very important and evident reasons, Joe Biden has engaged in something quite big. At least the sum seems to be very big. This package that has been adopted quite recently. Mm-hmm. Is that something of a new paradigm that's growing, that's coming up? People are talking about Bidenism.
Yeah, so it could be. I think it will depend on a few other things that are going to happen. It's clear that in our grantee pool for this, more than 24 of our core grantees have gone into the administration all over the place. So they are thinking about these issues and what a post-neoliberal economic order looks like. They are definitely self-consciously thinking about it. One of the key changes that would be part of that would be the restoration of industrial policy, which is to say public spending in order to produce economic goals for the society as a whole, to bring that back into fashion. That was, that is an American tradition, although it's been done elsewhere in the world. The idea of industrial policy that was actually created by Alexander Hamilton in 1791, and it was a great American tradition up through the Great Society. And the neoliberals killed it because they don't believe in government playing a role. And there is a restoration through public spending that is definitely, was made necessary by COVID, but it's definitely something the Biden people are thinking about. But whether it sticks and takes is still up for grabs. The rescue package that just got passed is not an ideal industrial policy. It's a lot of stimulus, but it's also a rescue package. So the places the money went were focused very much around needs for vulnerable communities. Whereas the follow-up bill, which he's talking about, would target the spending in ways that are designed to build the broader economy, infrastructure support, climate and clean energy support, think broadly across the array. So it's a start, and just the mere idea of putting trillions of dollars of public spending into the market is a sea change potentially, but we'll have to see what the follow-up looks like.
Yeah. You have made clear that you want to go across the political spectrum, so you want to address people from different boards. Is that possible? Isn't it something, that new paradigm, that will address mainly one side?
So the key, neoliberalism is not a inherently conservative paradigm. There is conservative neoliberalism and progressive neoliberalism. Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, they were progressive neoliberals. What that meant is they accepted the idea that growth was the foremost goal. They were more willing than conservatives to qualify it for some redistribution, but they accepted the primacy of growth, and they accepted the primacy of markets. Government would intervene in exceptional circumstances where markets failed for some reason. So what we're talking about, as with all of these paradigm shifts, is not the left beats the right, then the right beats the left. It's a realignment. It's a redefinition of what it means to be left and right. And so that it starts out being framed because on surface, it looks more like things the left likes, spending, and so on. But ultimately, it requires, and there is a movement within the right to put the conservative versions that abandon the libertarianism in favor of some other promoting values, promoting labor and work to strengthen communities, whatever. It doesn't look quite like left wing, but it also doesn't look like neoliberalism. And so we want this should still be a pretty broad tent. It's a different tent than the neoliberal one, but it should still be a pretty broad one that makes room for lots of different visions, and that has us then fighting within those terms that make sense for our world. So you have to, if you just turn it into, we're just going to look for people on the left to finally beat those people on the right, you're just replaying the same script we've been playing badly for the last 2 decades.
To finish, the easiest questions of all, how much time will it take to introduce that new paradigm?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I had some really interesting conversations yesterday. We know we're not there yet because we don't have a name, right? So, when I used to write articles, I would have thought it all through, but I wouldn't start to write until I knew what the title of the article was, because when I could boil the idea down to a title, that's when I knew I had it. And so the first step is to get there. And I think we'll get there within the next few years. And then it's a question of persuasion, of putting it out in the world. And that will happen through a combination of successful political campaigns that produce results that work for people, and a lot of just talk and conversation and so on. And it's hard to know how much time that will take. What's scary is it's not clear it'll take. Like I said, if you think Brexit, Trump, the rise of right-wing parties in Western Europe, Orban, Duda, Duterte, Modi, Bolsonaro, they are all reflecting a different version of this, which, as I say, I would call ethno-nationalism. That one is taking big time. It could take. Then we're going to have something that looks more like World War II. And so, the stakes here are high, and it's not, victory is not assured by any stretch.
No. I've always been impressed when we thought about the former paradigm shifts by something which I keep in mind. One of the former German leading economists in the 1970s, who has contributed in the late 70s to the neoliberal revolution in Germany, has described this time at some point, years after that. And he was describing it as such a hard time at the end of the 70s, early 80s. And there was a wall of resistance and a déformation professionnelle and so on and so on. And that's something I'm keeping in mind. At that time, the guys didn't realize that they are about to win.
Yeah, right.
And it's only in hindsight that it appears to be clear. I mean, it appears Thatcher, Reagan, and the like. But so that's something I'm quite a little optimistic. Maybe we are underestimating how much thinkers are already around the Danny Rodricks and Mariana Mazzucatos and so on.
It might be, but remember, there were those people on the other side in that period who felt the same way and did lose. So we don't know which one we are yet.
Absolutely.
There were left alternatives out there. And the other thing to bear in mind here is no one's talking about like abandoning everything and coming up with something completely new. I mean, it would be astonishing if any paradigm was completely wrong, but we're really talking about our shifts. Some things that have been low priorities become high priorities. Some things that have become high priorities have been low priorities. A few new things are introduced. So you're talking about something that is, in one sense, evolutionary, but that has potentially revolutionary consequences once it's articulated and takes hold. I mean, the most interesting thing for me about this whole thing, I have to say this. Neoliberalism is kicked off as a movement really by the publication of The Road to Serfdom by Hayek in 43, 44. At the time, that book is treated like a radical screed, right? It's extreme reactionary craziness. If you read it today, it's like a half an inch to the right of the New Deal. I mean, it's barely conservative at all. By 1962, when Milton Friedman publishes Democracy and Freedom, he's pushing ideas that were not imaginable in 1944, because what these paradigms do is they change our imaginations.
Absolutely.
And so they have, although they are evolutionary in one sense, they have potentially revolutionary consequences that play out because of that fact.
And that's something I'm thinking about in the positive sense that, I mean, we don't, day by day, we don't realize how things change, but at least for Germany, I'm very
Yeah,
confident that, you know, we're talking about things today that we wouldn't have talked about 10 years ago. And, you know, you forget about how conservative, how neoliberal, and how market oriented they were at that time. And they don't, I mean, now it's even in Germany, we're used to say that at some point fiscal policy needs to act, or the state needs to
right,
redefine its
right.
role. And so it's a very, it's difficult to perceive what is the change, and that's
Yeah.
exactly what
You
you're
know, the
saying.
reason that that last point is so important is because the biggest struggle that we face is getting our co-funders and current allies to think beyond the immediate policy solutions that they want to see implemented. So it's like, yes, those things are important, but what we're really talking about here is developing solutions that we can't imagine yet and freeing that space up, you know. And so that to me, that's half the argument. And the other half is if you just push these policy solutions, even if they work, they're not going to stick. The Affordable Care Act is a really good piece of legislation. It's got its flaws, but it's definitely not a bad piece of legislation. But it has not been able to establish itself because it's still framed as contrary to, you know, core principles of markets. Unlike Medicare and Medicaid, which were enacted in the 1960s when like acceptance of government intervention was at a height. And so although there was plenty political opposition, once they got through, they were just absorbed into the system.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Fascinating. I mean, and I don't know how you feel. we're feeling like, I mean, since we started in late 2019, it seems we have such a tailwind and so many confirmation of what we're doing. Even the conservatives, like Schäuble or others, are starting to talk about the downsides of globalization and the need to redefine the role of the state and so on. That's fun. I mean, as you
But it's easier in Europe than in the US, not just because the neoliberal ideology was deeper in the US, but also because take business and climate. The business community in Europe is on the side of taking climate action. I mean, they're not out at the extreme, but compare the US business community, right? So we're facing financial opposition, you know, resources, and an organized movement in opposition that is on an order of magnitude that has just never existed in Europe.
No. Yeah, sure. I mean, on the other side, as you know, Germany was stuck much more than other countries in Europe into this orthodox.
Yes, that's true. That's a product of the 1920s, right? That's still leftover.
Maybe the 1920s, and I mean, Germans love to.
And the East Germans, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Germans love to be very 100%, and you know, and as we turn to the supply siders, it took a lot more time to get back, and it was more religious than other things. So, but it's all the more fun now to, after many years of fighting and thinking about all this, suddenly you feel like, well, now it's really going on with an open end, as you said. I mean, it's quite frightening if you think about whatever may happen next year in France with Le Pen and so on. So it's open, but happy to have a lot of brilliant minds like you and feeling like.
Well, for us, it's like really thrilling to, you know, again, making this global is so important. It just can't be a US thing. So it's great. And of course, the opportunities in Europe are bigger and better to move faster.
Excellent. Many thanks for your time.